Hi, Gary.
Hi, Guy. So we're in Edinburgh. We did a show last night. That went really well at the Usher Hall.
Yeah, we did a show last night and we're leaving very soon to go to Manchester. So we're somehow managing to squeeze in Neil Finn because it's such a brilliant opportunity to speak to such a wonderful talent.
I mean, I've been wanting to get this guy on for a while. You know, I mean, all the way from sort of Split Enz, Crowded House, and then stuff he does with Tim, his brother, and of course becoming lead singer with Fleetwood Mac. But he is one of the world's greatest songwriters, without a shadow of a doubt.
He is, absolutely. There's a quote from Paul McCartney, isn't there, where Paul McCartney basically made out he thinks he's a better songwriter than him.
Really? Really? That would put a lot of pressure on one, wouldn't it?
It would, wouldn't it?
It's very late. He's apparently just come in from a dinner party. It's very early here in Edinburgh. We've just had the haggis breakfast. He's just had a few reds at a dinner party. Let's get him on.
Welcome to Rockonteurs.
Okay, guys, I'm ready.
That's a big tune for sure. I actually wrote that originally for Tina Turner.
Of course, I had gone and found Joni Mitchell down in Florida and brought her back.
I've listened to a few of them and they've been really good, man. I'm sitting in the back of the car coming into London. They're brilliant.
Thank you guys for still being around, still making music, still being into it, and doing this podcast. It's fabulous.
So great to talk to two guys that have done this.
Remember me? I'm in a band now. It's called Roxy Music.
You know this thing about the 10,000 hours of experience?
Oh, yeah.
Get good at something. When we recorded Arnold Lane, we'd done about 50 hours.
The Rockonteurs podcast with Gary Kemp and Guy Pratt.
Hey!
Oh, thank you so much for talking to us so late at night.
Right. Well, as long as you're there and I'm here, it's all good.
Where in New Zealand are you, Neil?
I'm in Piha Beach, which is just 45 minutes west of Auckland.
Very nice.
So you know we're on tour at the moment, so we're trying to make this work from our hotel. We're currently in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
We play
on tour with who?
Nick Mason.
Oh, okay.
Nick Mason, Pink Floyd. So we're part of the Nick Mason Saucerful of Secrets band.
Oh, excellent.
And,
great.
Got a big tour coming up, so we're just only at the beginning.
Where are you playing? What venue?
Usher Hall, which you've probably played.
I have done the Usher Hall a couple of times, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lovely room. It all seems like a dream.
It's a lovely room.
It seems like a dream from here now because we're going to be there in a month. I'm still going, really? I don't think, surely that's not going to happen. You know.
I know, well, because you guys have only just opened, haven't you?
We've actually had the same tour on sale for the last 3 years and we've just kept moving it on by a year, so... This tour that we're doing in June is basically the same tour, and it's all been sold for 2 years as well. So we actually are incredibly grateful and kind of surprised that people have held on to their tickets for so long. It's fantastic.
Yeah, we're exactly the same. This is a tour that was sold nearly 3 years ago, and there are a few empty seats here and there, and and no one has reclaimed those.
People have forgotten. They've forgotten.
Well, I think there's a slightly more macabre view one could take as well.
Well, they might have COVID or... Well...
never made it.
It doesn't pay to... I mean, we are doing our first...
No, exactly.
Our first 4 shows are at the Roundhouse in London, and if you were to, cast your mind back 2 years, because I've been wanting to play that room for a long time, having done it in 1970... I think it was actually 77 with Split Enz, and it was one of my favourite gigs of all time when that venue had just opened, and... So I kept hassling the agents to go, I want to play the Roundhouse, and it hasn't happened until now. Well, let's not tempt fate by even talking about it.
We just
Neil, 3 years ago yesterday, we recorded our live album at the Roundhouse.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
And it's a great venue, right?
It's fantastic.
It's fantastic, and it was great for us because it was opened originally by Pink Floyd in 1966.
There we go.
But yeah, no, it's the best. You'll love it.
I have huge memories of it that date back to my first experience of playing shows in the UK, so it feels like a coming home, but really,
well we'll go back to Split Enz in a minute, but this is interesting for you because you're such a family guy, or touring with your brother, and now you're on tour with your sons, right? I mean, I guess they're coming with you, and you've got a new Crowded House album, Dreamers Are Waiting, with your boys. How does that feel for you? Do you take on the role of dad when you're away, or is there an equanimity now?
Well, I feel incredibly blessed to be able to be in a band with my sons, as I did with my brother. And, you know, I mean, at the time when I joined Split Enz back in 1977, there would have been quite a few people in the small but, you know, passionate group of people who were supporting the band who would have thought, that's nepotism, pure nepotism, look at it, he can't even play the guitar. And I couldn't really, it was true. And the other members of the band were competing to be on the other side of stage from me because I was, you know, a musical dilemma really. But I got good quite fast in that situation. So, but I don't compare that to this situation. But what is absolutely glorious to me is that I'm in a band with 4 other people who I consider to be, you know, some of my favourite musicians on the planet, and that includes my son Liam on guitar and vocals and my son Elroy on drums. So, and people will see for themselves, hear for themselves that this lineup is a really hot band. And so far from being just a good idea on paper and a nice way to spend time with your family, it's actually a really beautiful musical development for me, and I feel the band has got new life. There's new, you know, songwriting chops in the band and arrangement ideas, because these guys have already put quite a few miles on the board, and they bring a lot to the thing. So yeah, it's a fantastic convergence of a good idea for keeping a family together and also a good idea for keeping a band together.
How is it writing with one of your sons? Do you remember that first time?
Liam, my older son, and I wrote an album together before this, which is called Light Sleeper, and it was the first time we'd done lots of stuff together live and in various contexts, but we never actually sat down and figured out how to write songs. And it's actually, for me anyway, it's a rare convergence. And I've written songs for my brother and sat in a room and we've had, you know, to and fro banter, musical banter that's been really exciting and dynamic. But I haven't really had that experience with many people. I'm not like a Nashville kind of guy, you know, I'm not like a guy who walks into a room and can bash around ideas. I have a way of working on my own that is, and I enjoy, and it's worked for me. So to be able to write songs with Liam was a really beautiful development. And, you know, there was a few days where we would have that 1,000-yard stare at each other and like, oh my God, this is too hard. There's too much water under the bridge. It's too much family shit going on. But that happens in any musical relationship. I think if it was easy, we'd all be doing it every day and writing, you know, huge universal anthems every day. But it's not easy, is it? You know, except when it is easy. You know, like it's every now and again it is easy, and it's because you put the hours in, I think.
But do you have very different hats that you put on for when you're writing on your own or when you're working with someone, or is it just whatever happens in the room?
Well, I mean, I'm always full of self-doubt, and, you know, and when I'm on my own, there's 2 or 3 days go by and I think there's not a musical bone in my body, and I've said that to my wife quite a few times. When I come in from a day in the studio, I say, oh, it's not a musical bone left in my body. And but somehow I also now don't have that moment of panic where I think, oh, that's it for me, I'm never going to write another song again. I just sort of figure that it'll roll out at some point. And then you have just a couple of fluky moments where a bit of phrasing will click into gear, or a line will pop into your head, or you'll change one chord and it suddenly becomes something, you know, banal, becomes something inspired. And the same thing happens with when you're sitting in a room with somebody. You just got to trust the process, and, you know, and trust that the person you're with has got something essential that they need to get out, you know. And if you provide a nice environment for that to happen, it will happen.
I mean, lyrics, obviously, I find that's the hardest thing to write with someone else.
Oh, yeah.
I think sitting down, writing music together can be easy, but it's deciding who's going to be honest in this situation, or if this is a tale you're both going to combine together. Is that harder with your son, to write about love, to write about fantasy?
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you were to be deliberate about it and to be conscious about it, yeah, it would be incredibly difficult.
You could use it as a way to communicate with each other, though, can't you? You can kind of quite surreptitiously say things that you don't necessarily want to say out loud, yeah.
Yeah, no, with the therapy, I think it's better to leave in the abstract, I think, the therapy, when it gets too specific. But, I mean, and I think my sons maybe have a similar approach to me with the lyric writing, and I don't know how it works for anybody else out there, but I have had quite a few seriously good writers say to me, "Oh, the lyrics are the hard part." So I think it unites us. Those of us who are not Bob Dylan, it unites us to have, you know, that be the struggle. And I think it's worthy of a struggle, because even if your lyrics end up being of a pop idiom and kind of ones that just going to get people feeling good or thinking good thoughts without concentrating too much on the narrative, it's really important that they're up there, you know, they're worthy. And as time goes on, they become more and more important to get right. So, yeah, but what both my sons and I, our approach is to let the subconscious deliver as much as possible before the conscious mind has had a chance to criticize. So,
although sometimes, Neil, the other way around, sometimes you can begin writing lyrics very consciously, self-consciously, and then suddenly from somewhere you weren't expecting comes something that just excites you so much, and you would never have thought of that as the first line, you know.
What's that like? No, I don't know. You know, I'm sure that's true, and I probably have had a couple of moments where that's been true, but mostly for me, I get a piece of music that gets me going, you know, like something that I get involved in, and I make a series of demos when I'm writing, and it was the same on a 4-track cassette recorder as it is now on Pro Tools, but I get more choices now on Pro Tools. But I just start humming away and singing sounds, and phrases pop out, and then you get something that you can, you know, hang your idea around, and you go, okay, well, that's a good line. And so now that becomes the theme of the song. And then I don't really want to think about it too much. I kind of pop a few things out that feel like they're inhabiting the same space, maybe the same character singing them, and keep going on that front. I try and keep it as subconscious as I can for as long as I can. It's a puzzle though, and it's you know, like, you're aware that there's an element of skullduggery, and it could all go horribly wrong at some point, but it has served me well over the years. And then at the last phase for me is like, okay, I've got these lines and they don't really make sense, but actually now I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, well, that line seems to suggest this idea, and I was reading something today that connected with that, so I'm going to that's what the song's about. So that's the last thing I do is figure out what the song's about, generally.
There's a skill that you've got, and I don't know what it is that allows you to keep this, but you can write love songs that are pop songs, that are commercial, but a bit like Nick Lowe, you always manage to retain an indie feel, a feel that still has a line of credibility. It never gets into the schmaltz, and it never feels wasted. You know, that's the genius for me.
Well, it's a very kind thought. I think there's a little bit of vulnerability that is
that's the word.
What you're getting at, really, and in a way, it's a certain inadequacy that I can't actually bring myself to write out and out pop song, whether through inability or just a kind of there's a line you can't cross, that you have to keep it within your own emotional vulnerability is the word, I think. And often that means that the songs aren't terribly commercial. You know, I've had a few really good successes over the years, but the fact of the matter is, you know, like I've
could say that.
I've had a lot of songs that I regard with as much affection as the ones that became successful, that weren't connecting with people at all. So that speaks to me of the idea that in order to write, you have to really be prepared to satisfy yourself and connect yourself with the most vulnerable part of yourself. And then it either works and other people get that and they empathize with that, or it just goes unnoticed, and that's okay, you know. There's so many things competing for people's attention out there. You can't assume that what seems essential or incredibly important to you is going to be essential or incredibly important to anybody else. So, but I keep going because I'm compelled, and I find it more fascinating than I ever did. And, you know, but there's no formula to it, and I haven't figured it out. So, but, you know, I appreciate your kind thoughts. I really do.
Well, so I don't want to get too technical because there's a wonderful thing with your writing, which is to do with the music, which is that you come up with chords that just work absolutely beautifully under the melody and heighten that, the way that McCartney does, rather than chords that sound nice together. Do you know what I mean? It's not about the track on its own. It's like the melody and the music come together and sit. So I'm just wondering if you're hearing a whole thing in your head when you write. It's not like sort of you come up with a couple of chords and that inspires a melody.
Well, I'm absolutely fascinated with chords and melodies, and I've learnt how to support that with lyrics. It wasn't part of my natural game when I was younger, and to be honest, when I listened to music when I was a teenager, and my first music I connected with, I never thought for a moment about what the singers were really telling me. I thought about what the words made me feel, and it's lines that opened up doors for me to my own thoughts. So, and it was only later that I became really appreciative of people who were spinning narratives together. So, for me, it's like words that they have to have kind of alchemy. They have to be something about them makes you feel, and I need to feel that when I'm writing them. I have to have a moment where I'm, writing it and I'm going, oh man, this is like some echo of some experience I've had or some feeling I've had, and I'm experiencing it again. And so you get it down and you do your demo and you go, well, other people are going to feel the same way. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But the lyrics and the music have to feel, to me, part of some alchemy, some experience.
Neil, Johnny Marr is a good friend of both of ours. He's been on the show, and I texted Johnny yesterday to say you were coming on.
Yeah.
And he said, Neil is amazing, as good as it gets. A friend of ours once said, when Neil writes a new song, you go, oh, of course the melody is going to go there. It's just that he's the only one who could do it. He said when he wrote together with you, he said you do this cool thing called pushing through the wall. And you've got some cool theory about embracing the mystery. He's the gold standard, he said of you. What's he talking about?
Well, he understands the mystery as much as anybody, so I don't know. It's a great compliment to hear Johnny say that about... I mean, we already had one... In fact, we were at Piha, where I am now, when we had a really enjoyable afternoon or two writing and playing guitars and hanging out. Johnny's writing and the way he puts chords together and melodies together is a perfect example of exactly what he's talking about, really. It's the mystery of... I don't doubt that he would be able to explain it any more than I can.
Pushing through the wall, though, what is that pushing through the wall thing?
Depends on how compelled you are, I think. And if you were to give up every time you felt that internal voice going, oh, this is fucking rubbish, and maybe you wrote a couple of good things, but now you should just go and hang out with family. If you push yourself through that wall and embrace the mystery, then something good will come of it. And I recognise that, but I also can't really explain it. But I think Johnny and I had connected at a point in his life where he was in between a lot of very powerful things and not necessarily understanding where he was at in his musical life, and I was in exactly the same place, coming from a couple of different bands, and I think we recognised in each other a kind of a compulsion to push through that wall,
No, I get it.
So
I get it.
What he says relates.
I saw him playing with you at the Shepherd's Bush Empire. In fact, he introduced me to you briefly backstage.
Yeah.
Years ago. And you did a version of There Is a Light That Never Goes Out.
Yeah.
Which to me is now the definitive version. I don't ever want to hear anyone else singing it.
Oh, that's very kind. I did enjoy... we did a Seven Worlds Collide, with Johnny, and after I just met him, and Ed O'Brien and I were sitting at Piha. It's just been a pivotal place, actually, obviously. He was having a holiday many years ago now. I think they'd just done Kid A, and we were talking about how many times you meet musicians and you're on the road or in hotels or in airports, and often the conversation when you're enthusiastic about each other's music ends with, oh man, it'd be great to do something together one day, especially people in bands who only ever get to play with their band. They're all...
That was my line for the end of this podcast, Neil. You've just ruined it for me.
Oh. Yeah, let's do something together one day, man. Yeah. Well, we said that, Ed and I said, if we did something here, maybe we should do these concerts here just for fun. And who would you invite? And the first person that came up was Johnny, because I just met him at the Albert Hall about 6 months earlier. I'd done a Linda McCartney a benefit for her, and Johnny was there. Yeah. I was, and we'd just hit it off nicely, and I got his number, and I went, oh yeah, okay, well maybe I should just call him and see. I was sort of going, well, what do you think? Maybe you should think about it. And he was going, yeah, no, man, it sounds great. I'm there. And so he was immediately signed on, and it was the same thing with Ed Vedder, who maybe was in between a little bit as well. But I rang him up and I was going, oh yeah, man, we had this mad idea, to come down and do some shows in New Zealand. And he went, yeah, okay, cool. I'm there. It's great. And it was just one of those weird moments where everybody's lives converged, and great friendships were formed, and yeah, wonderful.
I remember seeing the documentary, but I couldn't find it recently. I've been looking to see if I could see it again, but I remember seeing it when it came out, and they're very difficult, those situations, because you've got people who are used to writing in teams, who are suddenly writing with you, and Johnny and Ed are quite similar guitarists as well. They both do their arpeggiating thing, but I think what came out was there was a sense of everyone trying to find honesty through their writing, and not worrying about, I've just got to fit into a particular genre and make something commercial, or make something that all our fans understand.
Well, it was actually just a really intense and quite stressful situation for everyone to suddenly find themselves. And we went to an old barn on the west coast of New Zealand, just up the road from here. And Ed and Phil arrived, and having never played with anyone else except for Radiohead, Johnny came in the midst of, I'm not sure what point that was at. He'd been played with the Pretenders, and he was, I think it was the Healers, just before the Healers.
All right.
And
electronic, just post-electronic stuff.
Yeah, just post-electronic. Yeah, I think that was around the period. Eddie, I'm not sure what was happening at what point they were at, but and Lisa Germano and friends, and we all arrived in this barn on the west coast, and we had 3 days to get ready. And what appeared like a really good idea on paper suddenly became this most terrifying prospect. And we're all going, oh my God, we've got 5 fucking shows and we've got to learn 20 songs, and we've never played with anybody else in our lives. So there was actually quite a degree of fear and trepidation going into the whole thing. But there's something absolutely wonderful about putting that kind of pressure on people who are really good, substantial, fantastic musicians, because they rise to it, and by the time we got round to the first night in this beautiful old St. James Theatre, we did 5 in a row, we were sailing on some kind of willfulness, and we played really well, and it was, immediately pretty good. It got even better as the nights went on, but yeah, we're all stepping outside of, like, it's almost a cliche to say we were outside our comfort zones. We were well outside our comfort zones, but musically a wonderful experience for everybody. And I think in some ways for Phil and Ed particularly, had only ever had the experience of being in Radiohead. They were, suddenly incredibly plunged into self-doubt. We're all going,
liberated from Tom.
Well, they were liberated. Once we got through the first night, they were liberated, because we knew we were actually a pretty good band. And, like, there's a live TV special of it, and it really it comes across pretty good. I'm actually really proud of what we all managed to do, but it was really mad as well. So, yeah.
Should we go back?
Yeah, I think we should go back. Well,
Well, it's always interesting to know the very, very start, because it was the music in the house. You were always a very keen performer as a little kid, weren't you? Didn't they call you the ant or something?
I was the ant. Everyone in Split Enz had an animal. That was the humanal theory, and we all resembled some animal.
I'm sorry, the humanal theory.
The humanal theory is that everybody resembles some animal, and I was the ant, probably owing to the nervous energy that I had, especially as a youngster in the context of Split Enz. Noel Crombie, who some may remember as the kind of visual representation of Split Enz from way back, those that do remember Split Enz, and who designed all the costumes and was responsible for the haircuts, was the goat. Nigel Griggs, who was our bass player, was the turtle. Tim was the bull in a china shop. And Eddie was the horse, Eddie Rayner, the keyboard player, full of pride and cantering around like he owned the place, you know. So yeah, we had the humanal theory. I'm looking at you and I'm trying to figure out what animals you represent. I'd say a dog and possibly a bird. Looking at you.
Who's the bird? Who's the dog?
Oh, you're the bird, Gary.
Oh, thank you.
But
and I'm the dog.
Well, but that's not a bad thing,
right.
You know, Guy. You can't complain about a dog. It's the most loved animals on earth, really.
Well, yeah, they do express unconditional love.
Yeah, and together we do the bird dog, right? We do the bird dog, right? There we go. But listen, I think we're fascinated by your relationship with Tim, who's quite a few years older than you, right? And you know, this is a kid who's growing up, and you're still young, and he's got a band already, you know, and you're not in the band. I remember that situation in my own band when my mum said, "You've got to put Martin in your band," you know, because he's your brother, and I had to teach him bass. And he was going out on tours with even Roxy Music. I mean, were you feeling that you had to jump on that train, otherwise it was going to go and leave you?
Oh, no, I was just absolutely bewitched and fascinated with what was happening with my brother, because he went to university. I was 14. It was the early 70s in New Zealand, and he was hanging out with art students, and they were dressing in really odd clothes and you know, talking about really unusual music and he was bringing home records to me to listen to that were Roxy Music amongst them, actually. Bowie records, Roxy Music, Led Zeppelin, all this stuff that I was experiencing for the first time through him. And he was in a band, he was writing songs with Phil Judd, who was that was the songwriting partnership, one of those divine partnerships that only come around every now and again, and they were just writing incredible songs that were really different for the time. Like every other band in New Zealand, it appeared to me at the time, were, you know, like Status Quo, you know, bell-bottomed blues bands, and they were making really strange sort of, I guess it was art music at the time, and it was just completely, you know, fascinating for me. I was like just a young guy who was getting into music, so I was to be asked to join the band in 1977, and I was only 19. It was way before I expected, but I'd always in my mind, I suppose, thought, well, hell, I've got to be in that. You know, I've got to get in that at some point, or do something that's equally as fascinating as that. And so when I got the call, it was, you know, earlier than expected, because Phil Judd had left the band. And if I had been older, I probably would have double guessed myself and thought, oh, well, that's a pretty difficult job to replace the founder member who was one of the artistic founders of the band. But, you know, when you're 18, 19, you don't think about that shit. So you just, I was suddenly on a plane to London from New Zealand. You can't imagine what romance there was in that whole idea to be suddenly in London when everything we grew up with was at a distance of half a world away, you know, and there was no social media, so everything we got was like an enemy 3 months after the fact, or, you know, like a little bit of TV. You'd see just before I left, I remember seeing the Sex Pistols on TV. The week I left, actually, was 1977. So I was heading to London just as punk was about to find full flower, and we arrived, and, you know, it was Thatcher's Britain, and it was, but absolutely fascinating. I went straight to Catford from the airport. We had a little bedsit in Catford, and we were rehearsing at what now is John Henry's, I think. I can't remember what it was called then. It was
was it Easy Hire or something?
It was Easy Hire. That's exactly what it was.
Right,
and I got there, and me and Nigel Griggs, who was the new bass player in the band, were the only ones there, and we hadn't met each other, and so there was no band. They were all down the road at some cafe somewhere. So he's going, "Oh yeah, Nigel, how you doing? Yeah, I'm Neil. I'm the new guitar player." And he said, "Oh, I'm Nigel." And we're sitting in this rehearsal room for like half an hour before everyone shows up. So yeah, but it was amazing. You know, what an amazing thing for an 18-year-old boy from the colonies, you know.
I did the same thing in reverse. I got on a plane to Sydney when I was 19 to
really?
join an Australian band.
Holy shit.
But I remember Split Enz at that time, and I remember being amazed that you were from New Zealand, because you were so ahead of the curve. I mean, you saw these guys with your kind of very new wavy, Roxy type look, and thinking, well, they're clearly from New York or something, you know.
Well, we were sort of
you were
strangely
so cutting edge.
ahead of our time, and also outside of the time as well. We had no understanding of the sociology of music and fashion and culture. And you know, London. You arrive in London, and that was a very particular pivotal point for music, where everything just shifted. You know, the paradigm shifted. And it very quickly, because actually by 1980 or 1981 it all shifted again, and it was, you know, it was everything was up for grabs. But at that point it was almost, I think the first gigs I remember doing, and the first gigs Split Enz did in London, were being frequented by all the same people who were in, like Susie Sue was up there looking at Noel Crombie and staring at him the whole night, you know, because he was actually worth staring at, because he'd do nothing for 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden he'd do a little dance move and it would be fucking fantastic, you know. But so there was a point where, before the lines got drawn, we were of great interest to what was happening at the time, and we were far too sophisticated for our own good, but we had no conception of it. We didn't really understand.
Something like Deaf School would be the nearest thing.
Deaf School, yeah.
They were similarly cast adrift, I think, by at that time, yeah. There may have even been a definitive article in Melody Maker or something that said, these guys are not punk, and therefore you should not support them.
Yeah, but in a way, you would have
been.
You were well early, because in a way, you know, you would have been better off coming in the generation that I appeared in, you know, with this sort of more new romantic electronic stuff, and Klaus Nomi and people like that.
We might have been, yeah.
Listen, what I'm interested in is your relationship with your brother. I mean, you're brought into the band as guitarist and singer, but not as a songwriter, you know. And Tim's doing pretty much a lot of the songs. Gradually, you start to pop your head up as a songwriter. Was there a sense of, were you intimidated in doing that? Did Tim nurture you in doing that? Suddenly you're writing, by the time you get to True Colours, you're writing the hits.
There was never any discouragement from the beginning. I certainly wasn't summoned to be a writer into the band. It was kind of like they had lost a pivotal member of the band and the bass player who had also been there from the front. And I think the idea was that I understood the ethic and the aesthetic of Split Enz, so therefore any shortcomings I had as a musician were made up for the fact they knew I could sing, and, you know, that I would get it. I would be able to, you know, meld seamlessly into what they had created. I think that there was always an awareness that maybe there was some songwriting in me that might bear fruit at some point. And actually fairly early on, we had a fairly grim year, 1978. We lost management and we lost a record company, and, you know, just one of those years that bands sometimes have that are pivotal, where the world suddenly loses interest in you, but you have to dig deep and actually figure out whether you really believe it or not. And that year we holed up in our various houses, and I was living in Chorleywood with Noel Crombie, and we were just kind of really living on subsistence level. I think we were on the dole, and we were kind of just sitting around taking acid and making songs. And I wrote a whole bunch of songs that year, which became part of like an obscure Split Enz record, Frenzy. And then by the time we got through that, I was putting songs in that were being taken seriously by the band, and we converged with the point where the band felt like doing pop songs. We kind of got sick of being described as, you know, the guys that looked really weird and had really extensively obscure 10-minute songs, and we wanted to be a pop band. And, you know, influenced by the times, I guess, you know, get to the point, get to the chorus. And the songs I was writing were more like that, so they just fitted the new mold.
I Got You, One Step Ahead, all those kind of...
Yeah, I Got You was incredible. It's really hard to see where you came from. It's so unusual in its structuring of the verse. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, we were sitting in Sydney writing songs together, Tim and I, in Rose Bay, at a point where we'd had a couple of we'd gone back to Australia from England, and things had started to improve a little bit. We had good live shows, and our crowds were building a bit. And we just sat around. We knew we had True Colours coming up. We had David Tickle, who was our producer for True Colours, who'd just come off the back of working with Blondie and the Knack and all. He'd done all these Mike Chapman records. And we had actually had wanted to work with him a little bit earlier, but Mushroom had gone, we don't know who he is, you can't do that. You know, one of those mishaps. It took a little while, but he was the perfect guy for us at the time. And I Got You came about because Tim and I were swapping titles. He was in his room and I was in my room, and he gave me the title I Got You. I don't know, amongst 5 or 6 others, it wasn't one that particularly stuck out, but I found myself singing this verse, which I really thought was really strong. And the chorus, at the time, I thought, well, it has to be something like that, but it's not. I can't obviously do that because it's too corny. And then we got with the band, and the band played it. It suddenly sounded really not corny, but just really fucking good. But it reminded me, and it still reminds me, that sometimes when you think you're crossing into some, forbidden territory of it being, that's just too basic, that's too simple or too corny, that you're actually doing yourself a favour,
Yeah, there was a fashion at the time, though, for making those sort of slightly corny records, if you like. I mean, people like, Tom Petty and Squeeze or Elvis Costello, and I mentioned Nick Lowe. That's a style of music that has a little bit of tongue-in-cheek cheekiness to it.
Yeah. Well, I think humour is a great asset for pop music, even if it's buried, tucked underneath, like just the element of humour or pizzazz or, flash, or it's entertainment. And I think there's nothing more boring than earnestness in pop music. So, however you find a way to get your humour out there, it doesn't have to be overt. You don't have to be cracking jokes, but just give it a bit of, pizzazz.
Yeah.
And how was your relationship with Tim through this? Did you have sort of, the classic rock and roll? Well, Gary, unfortunately, is a terrible model for this because him and Martin have always loved each other. But did you have the classic sort of rock and roll sibling?
No, we get on. We get on well. Like it's when you work with your brother, and I don't know how this works for you, Gary, but we've had our moments, but nothing on the scale of the Kinks or other brotherly fraternal relationships. There's been some disastrous ones out there. I think we've done pretty well. We've always managed to keep we can sit together at Christmas and have a good laugh. We work together for a while and it works really well for a while, and that creates some stress, and then it's really good when we step away from it and we work separately as well. And I think that's been a consistent thing for us that's meant that we can come together. We've got a couple of songs we've been working on recently which will appear in some form in the next little while, and they've got that really nice feeling of having come back to something familiar and good, I
don't want to jump around too much because it was noticeable when he came into Crowded House, there was a harder edge came into the songs, it seemed.
I can't say analyse it in any concrete terms that, but it was a good
no, it was fantastic. I'm not saying it's I actually worked on an album with Tim in lockdown, his album with Phil Manzanera.
Right. So what were you doing on that one?
I was playing bass on it.
Oh, nice one.
Just on a few songs.
Yeah, great. It's a good record. I like it. I wasn't aware. He doesn't tell me about what he's doing, and then all of a sudden I read about it on the paper somewhere, and I go, oh shit, he did a record with Phil. I didn't know that. So I did actually listen to it quite late. But he's notorious in my world for not telling me what he's doing.
Well, it's you have a funny relationship because
that's fabulous, though, isn't it?
Yeah. You're hugely close. Maybe. You're hugely close. You can write together, but there doesn't seem to be any codependency at all. I mean, he's not on the new Crowded House album, and yet you're still working together, and that obviously was a choice. And obviously at this point we're up to in your story, and we don't want to keep you all night, obviously, because I know it's very late there, Neil, but Tim leaves and you're left in Split Enz as the sort of front man. What was his reason for leaving and you staying?
Well, Tim had an experience of being a solo artist at a certain point with Split Enz where it felt incredibly liberating, and he also fell in love with a very glamorous and fantastic actress at the time, and I think he just saw his life.
Oh yes, of course.
His life expanding in a way that being in Split Enz couldn't quite match. And it, he'd been like, he'd lived Split Enz since he was 19, 20 years old, so he was like, Not many bands can last more than 10 years, with the obvious exception of some rare people like Fleetwood Mac, who have somehow managed to last the distance for 50 years now almost. And I don't know how that worked. Well, I should know, but I don't really. And,
well, yeah, you're part of that story.
Well, it seems like a dream really now, but but how they've managed to do that, I can't fathom, because it's really, being in a band is a, and I'm sure you understand how that is, but it's a very intense relationship.
Oh, fuck it, let's talk about it now, because Neil, it was so brilliant to see that Fleetwood Mac show and see you fronting it. Obviously, you got a chance to do one of your own songs as well. We've had Mick on the show, and we've had Mike on the show as well. Mike Campbell.
Yeah.
I mean, what was extraordinary is it took two of you to replace Lindsay, really, didn't it? I mean, because Mike on guitar and you on vocals.
Well, I think it was a smart move on their part, and made perfect sense to me too, to not put one person in the role of seemingly replacing a pivotal part of the Fleetwood Mac story. So yeah, that was part of what made sense in the whole preamble of working out whether it was a good idea or not. The offer was obviously immensely flattering and lovely.
Who thought of it? Was
unexpected.
Yes, how did it come about? Did you know them?
We'd got to know Mick pretty well, and we'd been hanging out a little bit, and he came down and played some drums on some tracks that Liam and I were working on. So yeah, so there was a little friendship had developed there anyway, but yeah, it was a wholly unexpected thing to get a call from Mick as I was about to go to a sound check for a gig I was doing, and he has a very roundabout way of explaining anything, so it took him about 20 minutes to get round to actually saying, do you want to come and have a play with Fleetwood Mac? But I kind of knew straight away what he was getting at, but just, he couldn't bring himself to actually say it. So, and then I had to say, look, Mick, that's an incredible invitation, but I've just got to go to soundcheck, so I'll have to ring you back tomorrow. So it was a genuine thing, but it was also good to have, because as much as it was a incredible thing to happen, when you think you know what your life is and your musical life is, and you go, well, I'm pretty happy with how it's worked out so far, but to have that come along was just a wholly unexpected, magical thing. But I wasn't entirely sure it was right. I thought, well, this could be just a really bad idea. And it was my son Liam and my wife Sharon the next day when I talked about it with them after I'd done my gig, and before I'd called Mick back, that went, what, you're not going to go and sit in a room with Fleetwood Mac and sing with Stevie and Christine just because you think it might be a bad idea? And they go, well, actually, no, you're absolutely right, of course. Because that's all he was saying anyway. Come over and have a play and see what it feels like, which is all it ever is with a band, right? Right when you're back in the day in your mum's front room and you go, wow, so I hear so-and-so is a really good guitar player, let's get him over and see how it feels, So it's still like that with Fleetwood Mac. You'd have to stand in a room and you have to sing with people and make sure it feels okay. And that's what we did.
How nervous were you? Did you feel that was that you were singing these songs that was so ingrained in people's minds that this new voice might be not the one they want to hear?
I wasn't that nervous. I mean, I kind of felt like I'm pretty happy with what was happening in my own musical life at that time, and I thought, you have a crack and see how it feels, because it had to feel right to me as well. And they walked in. It was a really weird situation the first day because the room we were playing in just sounded terrible. Like it was one of those awful, dry, horrible rehearsal rooms. And the first thing that they wanted to do was to sing together, which was great. I understood. We gathered Christine and Stevie and me around a little area and the band are playing, but there was no ambience in the room whatsoever. And it still sounded pretty good, but it was just like not a forgiving environment. The next day we came in early. Mick, it was Mick's idea, and he's a smart guy, and that's the reason the band has lasted as long as it has, because he knows both instinctively and emotionally and intellectually what it takes to keep a band together, and he's fought hard and long to do that. So I give him incredible credit. He said, let's go in an hour early before the girls get here and get ourselves settled in, get the sound right, get the monitors working. And so we did, and we're all playing stuff, and Mike was there and it was sounding good, and I got my guitar sound, I got the monitors working. And so the next day they came in, we were singing as a band does through the monitors, and it was all set up right, and it just sounded fantastic.
Yeah.
And the voices sounded good together, and I thought the blend is good, and I didn't know whether they, you know, I could tell it was a good rehearsal, but I didn't know. They went out to dinner together that night, and Mick was really late back. I was staying with Mick at the time. He was really late, like midnight, 1 o'clock before he came back, and you know he'd had a few, and and he insisted on going upstairs and getting changed before he came down to tell me what the band thought.
Oh God, eke it out.
Yeah, fuck yeah. He's like, that's him.
Into his smoking jacket.
And then he came down and said, yeah, no, everybody, it's unanimous, everyone. John, straight away, you know, everyone. I've never been in that situation before in my life where I've actually passed the audition, and I've got to say, it was a lovely feeling.
What way round was it? Was it like, let's try it out with you, and then if it works, go and do something, or was it there's something going to happen?
No, it was. We had 2 days rehearsal. They had dinner, and I got the job basically. So you know, Mike had already been, you know, ticked off 2 months earlier or something. So, and then Mick went for a swim. You know, absolutely.
Did you phone your wife?
Smashed, and I had to go down and make sure he didn't drown. So that was my first task in the band.
Yeah. Did you go and get changed before you went to make sure he?
No, he wanted me to go. He wanted me to go swimming too.
A lot of changing going on.
But I said no, I'm not swimming. It's midnight. There's no way. But I'll rescue you if you need me to.
Stories like this is why we make this podcast.
Wouldn't be easy though. He's a big man. Yeah. That wouldn't be easy to rescue him.
You did "Don't Dream It's Over," didn't you? In the show.
We did that on the tour. Yeah, it was.
And it was. I saw the show, and it was. I'm surprised they let you do it, because it was the highlight of the show for me. I mean, it was absolutely stunning. And I remember Stevie introducing it.
They were very generous at in every way, really. They wanted to make sure that Mike and I felt we were, you know, a part of the band. So
I've got to ask you as a songwriter about the moment you wrote that song and how...
but I wanted to hear about that. Well.
I mean, I'm just basically what I'm saying is give me some tips so I can go and write one of those. You know?
Well, I should be writing another one of those by now anyway. So, I don't know. Yeah, I was at my brother's house in Melbourne. He wasn't there at the time, but I was there, and we had people turn up to visit, and Paul Hester was there at the time, and he was entertaining them. And I didn't feel very sociable, and I went into the piano and just kind of spilled out. And only a few songs ever do, but a lot of words, most of the words all at the same time, and sometimes words that end up feeling universal end up feeling quite personal. So they come to build a wall between us. Was just me talking about some visitors coming over to distract Paul from me. So it was one of those, you know, little personal life moments that ends up feeling kind of universal. And I went home and did a little demo of it, and instead of piano I did it on guitar because I didn't have piano at home at the time, and it was kind of exactly the same really as the record in a demo form, without the organ solo, without the B3.
Oh, that was just gorgeous.
Which Mitchell, you know, give him absolute...
Mitchell Froome, yeah. He was a big part of your story, wasn't he? From the word go, wasn't he? Really, Mitchell.
Well, yeah. I mean, he was a great person to meet at the time that we went to LA to do our first record. He introduced me and us to a whole different set of influences. I've come off the back of Split Enz, which was, you know, in a way very much coming from an English pop tradition. Mitchell had, you know, the B3 thing going on. He had like an appreciation of R&B bass lines and things that I hadn't really been exposed with. In fact, Don't Dream It's Over was the one thing that I didn't have on my original demo, was a bass line, and he put that, you know, boom ba dum 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 dum, which was a, you know, just a classic R&B moment, which he played on the left hand of his Hammond when I first went to visit him. So yeah, he brought some really nice things into it, and then a little pad that he added, and just made the song into a... In fact, the first time we tried that song with Crowded House before we got with Mitchell, it sounded terrible. We couldn't play it. We couldn't figure out how to render that song. It wasn't working at all. So there was something about the tones and character that he suggested that really brought that song to life.
Yeah. Crowded House had that fantastic, proper, happy little gang vibe, didn't it?
Yeah, well, we were, like...
Because you knew Paul.
I knew, because I used to play for Ice House, right? And when I first went to Sydney, because John Lloyd, our drummer, shared a flat with Paul when he was in Deck Chairs Overboard.
Right. Yeah, I remember John,
And I remember Paul getting the gig with Split Enz, and it was a big deal. It was...
Yeah, well, there was a kind of a synchronicity there because... Well, I had actually rang Rob Hurst to see if he knew any good drummers, and he was mates with Paul, and he suggested Paul, and Paul came and auditioned for Split Enz, got the job, and then Rob was looking for a bass player, and we were living at the time with Bones Hillman, who's sadly no longer with us, but he was a fantastic bass player in a band called The Swingers with Phil Judd, and living as our lodger, and I said, you should try Bones, and he got the job in Midnight Oil, so we had a kind of a talent spotting thing going on between the two of us. But we were a gang, and I think the great thing about a band is that the music business is, it's hard for a number of ways, and it's not just music. It's when you start doing all the promotion and all the business to do with being successful and getting your records out there and making people aware of yourself. I think being solo is really lonely and kind of difficult, and it's no wonder people crumble under the pressure. Being in a band where you enjoy each other's company allows you to subvert the process and have a laugh, and it's so valuable, even from photo sessions to TV appearances and we really enjoyed each other's company. We really had a good time, and it became a good calling card for us, is to walk into a situation and leave people having a really good experience and having a good laugh. And it wasn't that we designed it that way, we just actually found that was a way of doing things that really made a difference.
I remember you saying a really sweet thing in an interview after your first album. Someone said, how important is the success of this, and what does success mean to you? And you said, well, it's great having a successful album because it means then you can afford to get Bob Clearmountain to mix your next one. And then you got Bob Clearmountain to mix your next album.
Yeah, well, we probably were negotiating with him at the time, yeah.
Yeah.
Neil, you hit such a rich seam as a songwriter. I mean, these songs have meant so much to me as well over the years. I mean, Weather With You, Fall at Your Feet, Into Temptation. I mean, I actually read that Into Temptation, your wife had heard it and thought he must be having an affair to write lyrics as good as that.
Oh, I can't remember now. It goes way back.
I wouldn't, if I was you, I wouldn't remember that. I'd be...
Yeah.
But also, I remember thinking how much, there was a track, I think it's on Temple of Low Men, Better Be Home Soon. And I remember when the Verve brought out The Drugs Don't Work, and it's like, but that's that song. Do you remember that?
It wasn't me that pointed that out, but Elvis Costello actually pointed that out to me. He was in New Zealand. I got up and sang with him at some event. I can't remember what it was now, but and he said, you should look into that Verve song. It's like I think they should be giving you some credit there. But I don't know. So it wasn't me that said that, but I'd say Elvis is a pretty good judge.
Well, I could hear it myself, but I think the Verve have suffered enough with publishing.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't impose on them at all. Yeah, they've had to really suck it up, haven't they?
Oh yeah, and in fact that was with the same producer. That was with Youth, your producer, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, he was coming off the back of that when we worked with them. Actually, it was an impressive production. It was part of our attraction to him at the time.
Yeah, but I remember another thing, which something always stuck in my head because I found it very amusing, was that Temple of Low Men, that title comes from a list of euphemisms, one of which you thought of using, was the eye that weeps most when best pleased.
Oh my God, you've really dug around in the annals there, haven't you?
That's just something I remember. That's been in my head since that album came out.
Gotcha.
I know.
Well,
that's what's so funny.
Chad Blake had a book of euphemisms, and
Chad,
and it was in the studio, so we were looking at it every day, and that's a true story. Yeah, as much as it's slightly embarrassing to admit. Yeah, there was many others as well that were equally as memorable. we won't go into.
Why did you decide that Crowded House had sort of had its day, and it wasn't by then Crowded House you?
Oh, I don't know. You know, like, I can't answer that really, because at the time it was just, I think success is a weird thing it doesn't improve many people's personalities in my experience, and it created certain stresses and anxieties in me that I look back and I go, why was I worried about that? And Paul Hester had left the band at that point, and we hadn't really dealt with that properly, and probably hadn't realised what a fundamental shift in the universe that was. At the time it had been so frustrating having him so unhappy for the last year of the band for unknown reasons at the time, that we were kind of going, oh, thank God something's changed, let's just keep going. And we did a tour, but then we got back to a rehearsal recording mode, and with a new drummer. He was really good and a lovely guy and everything, but I wasn't feeling it. And so I thought, if it's not the same band as it used to be and it doesn't feel right, then I may as well be free again and just go and find some new path. And it was, in order to serve the muse or something, I think. And but ultimately that's what I was thinking. I was thinking, I've got to keep it fresh and keep it moving. But looking back, you kind of go, well, somebody should have been protecting the personality of the band, and whether that was me or management or somebody, but nobody was thinking. You just realise that certain things get away on you. So that was probably the.
How do you know if you're writing for you or for Crowded House? When you
I don't.
You've just done. Is it because you've the different people in the room?
Writing is always the same weird, mysterious, unknown process that I just jump into and write a bunch of stuff. And I guess at times I was thinking, this sounds like stuff that a band should play, and there's times I'm thinking, oh, this stuff that I just want to play myself, or invent new sounds and textures for, or work with an orchestra like I did a couple of albums ago. And
Out of Silence. You're talking about Out of Silence?
Yeah.
I mean, that was absolutely my favourite album of that year. I thought the songs on that were so inspiring. I mean, I was lifted as a songwriter. I took so much out of listening to that album.
That's very nice to hear, thank you.
But what shocked me was realising that you'd recorded it all live. Is that right?
Yeah. It was a very willful, endeavour, and fantastic in its own. We had I guess 25, 30 orchestra players in the room, which is not a massive room, but it accommodated everybody, and me on a piano and vocals, and I had a choir of friends and kind of ring-ins, really. I wanted to make a choir of people that sounded like people singing around a fire rather than a really studied professional crew. But it was a really difficult technical thing for the people to keep everything separated. And we did a 4-hour session to make the actual record. We had 3 preparation weeks in the Fridays before, trying to get into that kind of mindset, and then we did it all live. We did 2 or 3 takes of most songs and chose the one we liked the best. But yeah, it was all recorded live, and then 3 days later it was mixed, and a month later, or maybe 3 weeks later, it was out. Given my time again, I probably would have thought, well, what's the hurry? Why don't I just do it like that, and then and then finish it at leisure?
That's a
very
novel
stressful
concept, isn't it? Campfire orchestra.
Yeah, well, I mean, the string players the orchestra were amazing. I've got a great collaborator down here, Victoria Kelly, who's an amazing arranger, and so that was all great. But I think we tried to do a lot, and it was. I'm not sort of saying that I regret any of it, but it was more stressful and more intense than it probably needed to be. But I would, like these things that you do, and you think, oh, next time so there will be a next time on that, and it'll be something that will be good to see live on the internet, which was part of the thing for me. I wanted people to experience it as it was happening,
The thing that must have been stressful was getting the vocals right. I mean, because there was, if you'd pitched wrongly and halfway through, and oh my God, I've got to get the orchestra back.
Yeah, no, I think I was pretty. I'd really done a lot of work on my songs at that point, so I was singing them pretty good. And I think my vocals generally were okay. It was really hard to get the choir to sound great on the night because there was so much leakage coming from everything else, and that was the hard part. But
Is
we
there
actually
film of
ended
it?
up. Yeah, that was all went live on the internet, and I think it's probably all archived somewhere. We maybe trimmed it down a little bit so that would be easier viewing, but yeah, it was like a 3-4 hour, at least 3 hours of. I've never done anything more exhausting, and we're talking, like it's all being live, so you're kind of aware of the people. Although actually, the process was good because I started to forget about having to consider people watching or listening, which is always good I think on the internet when people lose their self-consciousness, no matter what the idiom is. It's always good when you're watching something or listening to something that's happening, in real time.
Just to finish off, really, this new album, has it been done in lockdown, Neil?
The Dreamers Are Waiting was started in. We did it just as the pandemic was becoming a talking point, and we went into the studio for 3 weeks in LA and did all the rhythm tracks sort of on the floor like bands do or used to. Then lockdown happened and we went into our own little private spaces and sent files to each other for the next 3 or 4 months.
Well, that's quite nice. If you've got all the tracking done, that's kind of what you'd be doing anyway.
Perfect,
so
yeah.
That's quite nice.
And some of them remained pretty true to exactly what we'd put down, and some of them got thrown up in the air and reassembled through that process of sending files to each other. So yeah, it's a real mixed bag, and but I do feel it has a nice. At the core of it, there's a band playing, which is a really nice thing. And we just did some more recording. We went and played an Australian tour, and I got COVID in the 4 shows from the end, so we didn't get to finish it, unfortunately. But we went into a sort of an isolation for about a week or almost 2 weeks in Byron Bay, and you'd know that guy. I'm sure you've spent time.
Yes. In fact, John used to live there.
Oh yeah, there we go. Well, we went to the Music Farm, which you may remember from back in the day as well.
Oh yeah.
Somebody's put a lot of money into making it look exactly the same as it did back in the day. They've even put the same baffles in the ceiling with stains from God knows what band, but to make it look authentic. But it's in really good shape, and you can open the doors, and we had like this, we had crickets so loud that you could hear them on the beginning of every take, but it was a beautiful environment. We recorded 8 new songs just about 4 or 5 weeks ago, which I'm going to be working on the next week or so. So the band has managed, we've only been together for 3 weeks before the pandemic, 3 weeks during the pandemic when we did a New Zealand tour, and then again now in Australia, and we've managed to really use the time well. So yeah, there's some really good songs.
And how do you find your writing time? How do you find it? Do you try and make yourself do that as a job?
Well, when I was, I didn't mind lockdown, and I'd say that fully aware that a lot of people had understandably a very hard time, so I don't want to sound glib about it, but I quite liked it because I was able to get into my room every day with my coffee and just spend the whole day there, and there was no distractions, and I got a bunch of stuff written last year as a result, which now we're working on in some cases at the band, and there's other stuff I've got that I'm just working on my own. But so it was productive, and I enjoyed that part of it.
Neil, I'm sorry we can't come and see you on the road.
Oh, well, we can't. Yeah, we're probably going to have to maintain the bubble, backstage and everything. But
well, no, because we're on the road ourselves, so we're going to be away. Oh, you're on the road yourselves?
Yeah.
We've got 9 weeks in Europe when you're in the UK. I know that.
Shit.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, Neil.
All right.
We kept you up late.
Nice to talk to you, fellas.
Really great, Neil.
Total pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah,
really,
great. Really,
nice
Neil.
to talk to you guys as well. I hope your tour goes well.
And you.
Yeah, all the best.
Oh, what nice man.
Yeah, but Gary, I very like how you were mining the songwriter there.
Do you know what? I absolutely was. I mean, I find other songwriters' sort of work process really inspiring and intriguing. I felt like I was getting a free masterclass there that I didn't have to get my credit card out for. But it's made me want to go and pick up a guitar again, you know, and go to a piano or something. But he's so humble with it.
He's so humble with it, yeah. It clearly, no matter what he says, it clearly pours out of him, and he has to find an outlet for him all the time. You know, it's either a band, it's solo, it's doing this, it's doing that. But anyway, we need to get off because we've got to pack up and go to Manchester.
Yeah, I've got to do my suitcase. It's all over the room already. Of course, it always is.
Don't start me. Don't start me. Yeah. And if anyone knew the nightmare we've been through to get this to you, Gary and I have been all over the hotel. He's in the boardroom. I'm in the dining room. It's a nightmare. I was running around during that interview trying to find mains for my computer and there's no plugs in this room. And my computer is about to die. That's how much we love you people.
Luckily, we've got no show tonight. Night off in Manchester.
Exactly.
All right. We'll see you next week. We hope, if we can find some internet. Lots of love. All the best. What is it? What do we say?
Good night from him.
And it's good night from New Zealand and from Edinburgh.